Hello, everyone. I've had some technical difficulties today, so hopefully you can hear me. If you're on the chat, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, or say, yes, I can hear you. That would help me. I'm using a new mic, so I want to make sure that it's working. Well, we'll just keep going and hopefully you can hear me. Welcome if you're joining today. I'm excited for this talk. This is something that I've been working on for a while and have facilitated other meetings and workshops with. So I'm excited to bring this to you today. Um, oh, it does look like my microphone's working. Great. Perfect. Okay. So if you're joining me, I will invite you to just sit and relax and begin to take some nice inhales and exhales wherever you are. Breathing deeply, letting it all go on the exhale. Great. Thank you so much. So today's topic is NVC and empathetic communication. So if you are familiar with NVC or nonviolent communication, let me know in the chat or the comments. I'd be interested to see who here is already familiar with this. And if not, I'm going to go through some of it and we'll talk about some topics today. And I'll also discuss Marshall Rosenberg's framework for the 4 steps that he talks about in NVC, and we'll talk about that today. And I actually I did a card pull today and I got this, which is the Fool. So this is like the new beginnings card, and I feel like this is a great card for today because I personally feel that communication was really one-sided when I was growing up with people, and I had a lot of my own blockages around my throat and being able to communicate my truth and things. So this framework has really helped me to transform the way I communicate and to feel heard and understood and have more compassion for myself. So I'm excited to bring this today in hopes that this might help you or in someone else out there, um, either to communicate oneself better or understand oneself better or communicate with others and live in a more harmonious and peaceful community. So excited to bring this to you today. Um, and yeah, maybe we'll come back to that card pull again in this topic. So welcome. I'm going to take a little drink here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about today is I'm going to talk about some topics, and the first topic is being objective. And this can be really helpful. And I guess just to give a little backstory before I say this, um, a lot of some of what I'm talking about is coming from Marshall Rosenberg's book that I read recently, which is Living Nonviolent Communication. And empathetic communication is just another way of saying is a similar thing of saying that, but instead of like bringing the word violence into it, which is not really what this is about, it's just being more to the point of like conscious communication and compassionate communication with one another. And I also am going to talk about some things that I've found too. So the first one that we're going to talk about today, or that I'm going to talk about, is being objective. And so this is more about like looking at what a person is, the actual words that a person is saying, or the actual behaviors that a person is demonstrating, um, rather than reading into them or like judging what the person is doing. Um, so, for instance, this is this is a ridiculous example. I I know this, but so if someone was perhaps well okay, think about Miley Cyrus when she was years ago when she was at the music awards and she was like twerking in her bra and underwear. Um, there were a lot of there were a lot of I mean, objectively, that's what was happening, right? This was the action that she was demonstrating. It's like you can see that if you're looking at a video. Um, but then people were like, all these people came out and were like saying all these different things about what she was doing and like making these judgments essentially. Um, so being objective is like looking at the actual what is happening, what is being said, the words being said, what are the behaviors, and Miley Cyrus was twerking in her bra and underwear during the Video Music Awards. It's really not that surprising to me, but for some people it was very surprising, apparently. But I mean, it's okay to be resonant or dissonant on what someone is doing or saying around you, and that's kind of natural. Um, but when it's nice to communicate with others when you and just mentioning, objectively what's happening instead of just inserting the judgment or your personal beliefs right off the bat. Um, I guess what I'm trying to go into is talking about the difference between being objective and being judgmental. So being judgmental in this instance of like Miley Cyrus would be like Miley Cyrus is twerking in her bra and thong on the MTV Music Awards, and that must mean she's a prostitute. I mean, obviously, I'm not being serious, but like she has talked about that a lot of people were saying a lot of different things, and I'm not saying that this was actually one of them, but I'm just giving an example here. Like that would be a um, and the objective part would be like she was just dancing on stage in her bra and underwear. So that's one topic that another one that I want to discuss is the difference between personal perspectives and talking about the truth. And I this is like something that I've considered for years. I mean, I did environmental science as a major in college, and so I was like very interested in learning about, the nature of nature and reality, and I've learned a lot of things since then, but essentially I believe that we all have past experiences, we all have our own personal observations, and I believe that we all have our own personal truth, and that's not necessarily the absolute truth. Um, and I think sometimes I notice if certain people are using certain language and to signify like ultimate authority. Um, for instance, if someone is saying like the truth of the matter is, or the truth is, and I believe that through the nature of reality and truth, it's a good point to recognize that everyone has their own personal truth and everyone has their own beliefs and personal perspectives. So I believe that we could just start out by saying, I believe, or in my experience, or my personal truth is. And in this way, we're connecting to our own perspective rather than just um, saying someone else is right or wrong. And I don't think this takes away from anybody else's perspective, and I don't think this takes away from anybody else's personal belief by stating one's own viewpoints. I think that all of our personal viewpoints can be valid. And even if we disagree on certain things, it's okay because we're all allowed to have our own personal viewpoints. Um, so in NVC, in nonviolent communication, it's not like a competition. No one's getting an award here for you know being right or wrong. We're just trying to express ourselves and bring in more connection between people. And this leads me to the next topic, which is about personal boundaries. So let me just take a drink here. And if this is resonating with you, I would love to hear. Feel free to type in the chat if this is resonating for you, what you think about this so far. So, if we can all allow ourselves to have our own personal beliefs and viewpoints and perspectives, it's easier to be able to respect others' viewpoints and values and experiences and truths. Um, but one is also still allowed to have personal boundaries. So this leads me into boundaries, and this helps one feel respected and to be able to live and flourish in what one needs or doesn't need. And so a part of having boundaries is, well, this can be both physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and part of having boundaries is able to share what boundaries those are with others when necessary. It might not always be necessary, but this can be helpful to respect oneself and to show respect to others, to let them know how one is feeling, and to in regards to where the boundary is or where they are. Um, I know this is very vague right now, but what I'm pretty much saying is, it's almost it's like it's like if one person cares about a relationship or connecting with others, then it should be an open and good place to share personal boundaries because it shows that a person is wanting to still continue a relationship or connection with another person and not just like shut them off and forget about them completely. um, so it is respecting one's boundaries and sharing that can be a way to respect others and relationships around one. So that's that's what I'm trying to say. And if someone is crossing your boundaries or crossing a boundary for you, um, and it's not being brought up, then it if it goes on for long enough, it could create resentment, it could create anger or unhealthy relationship signs, um, and and if a person is not even if someone is saying, okay, this is my boundary, and the other person is continually not like respecting that, well, that could also create anger, resentment, unhealthy relationship signs, and could lead to an ending of a relationship. um, and I mean, it depends on each person and how one is feeling and what they need and all those things, but these are just some topics here. And I once again, if you're feeling connected to this topic, I'd love to hear in the chat, what you think of this. If you're familiar with talking about personal boundaries and discussing those, let me know. Let me just take a drink here. I've been working on these kind of ideas for the past several years, and so I'm familiar with these, but it wasn't something that I was educated with as a child. It was like the opposite in my situation, and it was like the same thing kept coming up for me. So it's interesting. So I'm interested to see if anybody else what anybody else thinks about this kind of discussion. So now that I've gone through a few of these things, I want to talk about the four-step process for NVC. And if you're like interested in this and you want to like work on this more in your life, I suggest or recommend that you take some notes and refer to them at another time. And these are coming from the Marshall Rosenberg book, Not Living Nonviolent Communication. And he died a few years ago, unfortunately, but he was a someone that worked with peace, and he did nonviolent communication in different countries. And I think he has really good work. So I'm excited to share this with you, but this is the 4 steps that is for nonviolent communication. And this can work in a variety of situations. Um, but I'm just going to start going into it. So, number one is noticing without judgment. So, I was talking about the difference between the objectivity and the judgment earlier in this talk. And so, once again, just noticing the actual words or behaviors that someone else is demonstrating. And this could also just be like if you're a witness to two people in having a disagreement or an altercation or something, just objectively stating like what happened between the two people or what words were said. Um, and I've actually had something happen this week where I'm giving an example, but this week I was in the kitchen and I asked someone to dry a dish and I thought they said yes, but then they just walked away instead. So I was confused to say the least. Let's see, am I still okay? Yeah. And so this is the first step is just noticing without judgment. So those words or actions that are being demonstrated. And then this kind of goes into the step number 2. So this is the feeling, and this can be connecting to the feeling at first. So noticing what one is feeling, and if you haven't had this kind of connection before, it's I I kind of see it as like a bodily thing. Even though if someone's just learning this, it might not be as it might not they might not understand that completely. But for me, I should say, for me, it's like I sometimes feel feelings in different parts of the body. And so that's where I can connect to that. And then being able to speak to that emotion once it's connected to. So for example, um, if you're just learning how to do this, you might connect to like basic emotional Dr. Seuss kind of language, like mad, sad, glad. Um, and that's okay. Anywhere you start is a good starting place. Um, but sometimes it's nice to have some further emotional words if you want to continue with this. And so just looking up kind of emotional words to study that and to become more interested in how to explain what's going on within oneself. Um, so that's number 2, connecting to the feeling and speaking to that. So for this example, I was kind of I was confused. I was feeling confused. And so going on to number 3 for needs. Once again, this is like connecting to the need, and a lot of time if you're doing nonviolent communication, it's like connecting to an unmet need. And there is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this comes from like psychological um, thing where it's like it's kind of an amalgam of basic common human needs. And not to say that every human has these exact needs, but it's kind of like a basic general idea. But so it's like a triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle there's like basic needs, and it's like on the bodily level, like food, water, shelter, warmth, clothing. And then as it goes up, it's like the higher levels of the self. And that's like, if you think about like the heart space, like needs that come from that heart space, it's like love, belonging, care, connection. And then if you go up to the higher levels of the self, it's like self actualization. And this is more of like a spiritual need. And so if you're interested in that, I suggest that you look up or Google Maslow's hierarchy of needs if you want to check that out. And there's also other charts that other NVC and empathetic communicators have created to show different kinds of needs, because not every need is on that list, and I think that different people have different needs because we're unique individuals, and that's okay. It's okay for us to have different needs too. Like, for example, I have a need for warmth, shelter, and harmony. So these are like some of those some of those higher and lower needs. And it's like nothing is wrong here. It's just like we're just expressing oneself. One is expressing oneself. So now the last part of this format is making a request, or you can make a request here. These are kind of optional, and it's like how far you can get with these sometimes. Um, so Marshall mentions that a request is much more helpful than making a demand. And in doing so, each person has the sovereignty to choose if one is fulfilling the request. So in this format, one can say, like, I am requesting, or I request. And in my example, I would be like, I request that people don't yell at me to get their point across, or I request that people do their own dishes, and if they're physically able to, and if they're not, just let somebody else know if they need help, things like that. So let me take a drink here. So in this framework, one is speaking from their own experience, and this helps communication for people to understand one another more deeply and on deeper levels. And people that we're communicating with, or want to communicate with, don't even need to have this format in front of them for this to work. Um, and by one just expressing oneself in this way, we can be teachers and having people learn through this kind of like empathetic communication. And not everyone has had this, and this is once again like, you know, kind of a sometimes new for people. So, being compassionate with oneself and being compassionate with others and their experience. And I think I was saying this the other day, just being I think that well, I lost it. I'm sorry. It's okay. So now I want to go into a little bit more. And so, okay. So, the basic gist of this is that this type of communication is coming from the heart. And rather than trying to judge people or tell them that they're right or wrong, NVC isn't about being right or wrong. It's about expressing oneself and what is alive within us. And when we do that, we can speak to what's within us rather than blaming other people. Or and when we do this, there is a more likelihood that our message will become heard and more understood, um, by whom we are wishing to communicate with. So I hope this is making sense. Please comment, either in the comments or the chat, and let me know. Let me know if this is resonating for you. And I want to talk about two more topics before I go into some offerings and closings and things like that. So the next one I want to talk about is pseudo feelings. So pseudo feelings is something that I really struggled with growing up, or I've struggled with for a while since I've tried to become more open to communicating emotions, because I wasn't that familiar with terminology of emotions and being able to speak to my emotions. So pseudo feelings is like, it's almost like saying I feel and then saying a judgment or saying a thought or a judgment. And so the feeling is different than a thought, if that makes sense. And I mean, there are nuances to this, don't get me wrong, but we're just trying to work on this, like, work on this at the moment. So, some examples of pseudo feelings would be I feel like you're a jerk, which is more of like a judgment or a thought. Um, I feel like I'm dying. This could also kind of be like a, a bodily pain, but it's not so much an emotional term. And then I feel like you don't understand me. I probably said this one a lot, but this one is like a thought. It could be a judgment, but there are probably more thoughts and judgments, but these are just some examples of pseudo feelings. And what I'm trying to get across here that it's much easier to use the language of the emotional feeling, and that's just getting back to those words, those emotional words, such as I feel sad. Sometimes people feel sad without crying. I mean, sometimes when people are crying, it's because they feel sad, but they might not always be crying just because they feel sad. Or I feel angry. It's possible to tell people that you feel angry without screaming at them. You might need to, like, one could go calm down a little bit before saying this. And I think Marshall talks about this in his book, that this is like more of a conscious way of communicating with people rather than just reactionarily reacting to what someone is saying or doing. I feel frustrated. I feel annoyed or irritated. And so when we're using emotional language like this, it's coming from connecting to one's own feelings. And I believe that we can feel these in the body, and or I can. And it's more about the connection between people. And when certain people are using pseudo feelings, these are more coming from thoughts and judgments rather than the actual emotional terms or what is on the deeper side of what is going on. So once again, let me know what you think about this. What do you think about pseudo feelings? Do you are you doing this as well? Have you done this in the past? If you've ever said, I don't feel like you're listening to me. I've probably said that a lot too, but that's probably a pseudo feeling. So let me know if you've done this and if you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, I have one more level to share here with the empathetic communication, and then we'll get into some offerings and closings. But so this next level of empathetic communication, and this can come in when we are perhaps the listener in if someone is coming to us with an issue, or we've we've expressed something to another person and they're sharing with us what is going on within them. And so when we're doing this, it's nice to connect to that format if you can. um, Obviously being empathetic is like allowing yourself the space to open up to listen to them, and kind of like being compassionate in what they're expressing with us. And sometimes if they're not familiar with this format, they might be expressing pseudo feelings or something, and at that point we might have to like dig a little deeper to figure out what is actually going on within them as far as the feelings or needs or requests that they might have. So if they're expressing something to us, that it might just seem like thoughts or judgments, we may have to respond like, I'm guessing that you're feeling angry because I'm I'm expressing my boundary, and that's not meeting your need for space. Is that right? So beginning to understand, what the deeper feelings and needs that they are actually having is. And also, if they're not sharing what requests might help the situation, you can inquire that as well. So maybe saying like, what do you th- what are you asking for in this situation that might help? And I feel like, or I should say, I think that NVC is about, meeting one's needs with the other ideally, is getting both parties' needs met if there's two parties, um, and not necessarily one person being the winner and the other person being the loser, but understanding that we all have needs and we're trying to get those met. And continuing with empathetic listening, so other steps here, of empathetic listening to make sure that people are feeling heard and understood is, um, reflecting back what the person you think is trying to say. So, I mean, this can be as easy as just repeating, what they've said. But again, if they're not talking about feelings and needs, trying to ask that as well or guess what they're feeling and needing. Um, and if someone is sharing with us, if we are the empathetic listener and someone is sharing something that, we feel empathetically connected to, um, one thing that it's possible to do when it's time, when we feel ready to respond, is connecting with our own feelings once again. And if I'm listening to someone who's explaining to me that they've had some trauma in their life, I can say like, I can connect to what's going on within me, and ideally connecting to what's going on within me, and maybe I could say like, I'm sad to hear that about the trauma that has happened in your life. I wish that didn't happen to you. Um, and in this way, I'm not just saying I'm sorry. Um, and Marshall talks about this, and because sometimes the apologizing or the saying I'm sorry can be connected to the idea that there's like wrongdoing, and that would mean like there's a right and the wrong, and that's just going back to that like winning and losing idea. Um, so connecting once again to the feeling, and expressing that. And I know that these are like kind of new terminology and concepts, and I don't always do it right either. So, or I don't always do it in this way, but um, learning and trying to integrate more of these kind of concepts into communication is nice. Um, and so before going, if you're having an empathetic communication with someone, um, it's nice if you have the time and the space to be like, is there anything else that you'd like to say? Giving people more space to express themselves if needed. Um, or is there anything that you need in this moment? Um, Sometimes people want hugs, sometimes they don't. It's also like up to us to know our boundaries and what we're able to give or not. Um, and I do want to give a word on unsolicited advice here, because I feel like this is something that not everyone has understood. So um, I personally feel frustrated that I was given so much unsolicited advice growing up, and it's just kind of looking at a person as like a mechanical problem to fix rather than like seeing that each human is like complex, and it's not like as easy as fixing a broken door handle. Um, um, so before just giving unsolicited advice, being like, "Oh, well, oh, I see you're doing this, so you should do that." Before going into that, just asking the person if you have that advice that you might want to share, just asking them, "Are you open to advice, or are you open to receiving suggestions or ideas?" And just listening to what they have to say. Sometimes people just want to feel heard and understood about where they're at, and and if they're feeling really lost and they might just want like an idea to bounce off of, they might be open to that. But that's that's part of it's part of empathetic communication. So and if anybody wants to express, in this way, what you're feeling, needing, or requesting, feel free to type that in into the comments or the chat. And let me just take a drink here. And I'm so grateful for Marshall Rosenberg's work and connecting and expressing oneself in this way. So to feelings, needs, and requests. And I believe that we can all hold the seeds of peace and compassion within ourselves, and it's possible to share that. So I'm excited for this new beginning, and I want to give like a little recap here of the NVC format. If you're wanting to work on this and practice this more. So, first step is noticing without judgment. Second step is connecting to the feeling. Third step is connecting to or expressing the needs or need. And the fourth step is making a request. And my suggestion is that if you're interested in this and you want to practice this more, to write these down in a journal or on a piece of paper and return to this if something comes up for you. So I do want to provide an offering here. So I do a Embody Your Goddess course for women, and this is a 12-week transfer. I believe it's transformational. It's transformed my life. It's a way of connecting body, mind, and spirit to the goddess within. And I do this over 12 weeks. And I have goddess rituals and goddess circles. So if this is something that you're interested, I hope you can check out my website. That's trinitywavedesigns.com. And I do have applications available. And if you're interested, please apply for the next round in March. I would love to connect with you if you're interested. So, thank you so much for listening to this. And I'm hoping that this topic helps you have more peace and harmony in your world and within your community. So, feel free to share this video with anybody that's might be interested. And so much love and light to you. Namaste. Bye.